The Chargers can still make a massive splash in free agency in a couple different ways. After primarily bringing in some of their own guys in Trey Pipkins and just a lot of internal free agents, as well as bringing in a new linebacker, there was really no big name that was flashy during this offseason, but with some time still remaining before the draft and the Chargers still having money, there are a couple options. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about 5 last-minute free agents that the Chargers 100% should target this year. So before we get into things, I have one question for you guys. Who do you hope of the remaining free agents that the Chargers are able to bring to this team? Comment that down below, and if it's not on my list, give me reasons why so that maybe I can add them to my own personal list. But now that we've covered that and I've gave you guys a question, why not go ahead and get right into things? So 5 guys that I think the Chargers should target through the rest of free agency. The first person I want to talk about is a guy that was on the team last year for the Chargers and was a lot more important than some of us realize, and that is going to be Kyle Van Noy. So Kyle Van Noy, of course, coming to this Chargers team last year from the Patriots, was on a really, really cheap deal, and a lot of people didn't expect a whole lot, but more of a veteran presence. But after joining the Chargers, he kind of surprised a whole lot of people. Kyle Van Noy brought in 46 tackles along with 5 sacks, including 4 sacks in 4 straight games. All that while we were dealing with some issues, injury issues, pertaining to Joey Bosa. And he was able to step up when we needed him most and was a big part of turning around this defense on that back half of the year. Now, Kyle Van Noy projects for 2 years, $7 million, which at one point was above the Chargers' potential. But now that they moved around some cap space and some of the other free agents that they might have targeted are no longer on the board, they do have the money to bring him back, and I think it would be well worth it to have him as like a backup edge for you. I mean, you already brought back Morgan Fox, a guy that some people thought wasn't going to happen and was a really, really important interior D-line. Now you have Bosa, who is dealing with injury. You have, Khalil Mack, who is getting older, and at some point he's going to start regressing, and you don't really know what's going to happen with Chris Rumph. Kyle Van Noy, already time in the system, already showed some really, really good experience with this team. I think bringing him back on this amount could be really, really good to do for the Chargers, and especially because not only the veteran presence, but he showed that he can produce again last year. So, not only that, I guess, one kind of final thing on this. Last year, Kyle Van Noy did tweet that he wanted to play the rest of his career with the Chargers. So why not grant him the ability to do just that? Bring him in 2 more years. He's probably going to retire in the next, realm of 2 to 4 years. Give him a shot. If he can keep up this pace, he's a well deserving of the money and would be a great asset for the Chargers to have. So that is my number 1 target. Now, the next target here is going to be at the same position at edge, but maybe a little bit different of a route, and that is going to be Jadeveon Clowney. Now, Jadeveon might be maybe not most people's favorite pick. He never lived up to the expectations he had when he was drafted, and he has had ups and downs when producing. But after being released by the Cleveland Browns and having a pretty solid year the past 2 years, at least when he was playing a full amount of time, I think that it could be a well worth acquisition. Now, he certainly isn't the player that he was when he was younger, and he certainly is going to be a massive impact guy for you. But at 30, he's an older guy that can bring you that veteran presence, and he only had 2 sacks last year through 12 games, which wasn't great, but just a year prior to that, he had 9 sacks through 14 games, which means 3 more games, you add another sack under that. Now he's a double-digit sack, which is right around where you had Khalil Mack. Khalil Mack had like 10.5 or 11.5, I want to say, this past year, maybe a little bit more, I can't remember exactly. And if you can get Clowney back to that level, which, I mean, just 1 year prior is where he was. If you get him back to that level, coming off as a backup behind Bosa and Mack, which for the same reasons, Bosa was just injured, Mack's going to start regressing sometime, and you don't know about Chris Rumph. Maybe if you don't bring in Kyle Van Noy, or even if you splurge and bring in both, if you can bring in Clowney and get him even just 1 year back and get him just around 6 sacks, Clowney could be a huge, huge upgrade over what you have as depth at this current moment. Now, his projections are a little bit over the place and a little bit hard to tell. The past 4 seasons, he signed 1 year of contracts. And like I said, he's had ups and downs. He had 9 sacks, and then he had 2 sacks. Now, you don't know what he's sitting at right now. I'd project he's going to be around 1 year deal once again. Although I've heard reports that he wants to sign a long-term contract now that he's been doing 1 year all the time. I'd say 1 year deal, $2 to $4 million, somewhere around there, kind of close to Kyle Van Noy. Maybe a little bit lower because his last year's production wasn't that great. But the name could be enough for that price to rise. I'd say, once again, similar to Kyle Van Noy, this could be a really, really good acquisition for a very solid price and something the Chargers could target and would honestly be a pretty good option for them to target because of you don't really know what's going to happen with edge and you don't force yourself to have to use a pick on edge. That's kind of the huge thing here as we're going through these players is allowing yourself the opportunity to not go after someone in the draft unwillingly because you already have that spot filled on the team now. The next player is going to be another Browns player that was just released. A lot bigger name and somebody that's been surrounded by the Chargers a lot recently, and that's going to be John Johnson III. Safety, a guy that almost every Chargers fan wants on this roster, and that comes greatly in part because of Brandon Staley. Just a few years back when Brandon Staley became the coach of the Chargers, John Johnson was one of the top free agents that was, covered as becoming a potential target for the Chargers free agency. Now he signs with the Browns. He has 2 all right years. 2 years ago, not the greatest. This year, kind of a little bit better than last year and close to what he was with Staley, but still not that level. Bringing in John Johnson, opposite of Derwin James, in a spot that you don't really know who's going to be in that spot. Nas Adderley just retired. Alohi Gilman hasn't shown you quite enough. JT Woods really showed you nothing. And do you really want to draft another young guy when you have such a great safety in Derwin James, when you could fill this role with somebody that already knows what they're doing, already has time in the system, and once again, makes it so you don't have to use a pick on a certain position? John Johnson's number, if we take a look here, last year, 101 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, an interception, and 4.5 stuffs in 17 games. Now, with Brandon Staley, his numbers were slightly better, but with 1 less game, and that's an important factor there. He had somewhere around, I think it was 105 tackles. He had I don't think he had much interceptions, but his numbers were slightly improved with Staley, but with 1 less game. That could bring it back up if he can come to this team and be an important piece for this Chargers. Now, with a projected contract around $5.5 million, and I'd presume to probably be a 1 year deal because of his downgrade in production with the Browns, kind of a prove-it deal. $5.5 million is a very, very good deal and should be well worth it for the Chargers, and maybe he'd even be willing to take a little bit less to get back with Brandon Staley. To fill that safety role, I think would be huge opposite of Derwin James. And $5.5 million for a safety, that's a really, really good deal. Rashawn Jenkins, a couple years ago, was a safety that a lot of Chargers fans did like, but got a pretty high-level deal, and maybe Chargers fans weren't willing to pay that. Well, guess what? Right here, John Johnson III, about $2 million a year less than Jenkins, and I say he's on par, if not better than, especially what we saw when he was with Brandon Staley. I think this would be an incredible acquisition, and maybe my favorite on this list that isn't a Charger. So this could be something that maybe already has been in talks, and I think could happen soon, but this is something the Chargers definitely should target. Now, the last one here is going to be from a Chargers rival and a player that I think could make a huge impact on this offense and fill a need that you don't have to target in the draft, and that's going to be a speed wide receiver with the name of Nicole Hardman. Now, yes, of course, from the Chiefs, and maybe some bad blood there, but Nicole Hardman shows you a lot. Now, last year his numbers weren't great, but he was dealing with some injuries, missed some time there, and kind of the biggest thing here with Nicole Hardman is going to be his speed. The Chargers want a sub, at least fans do, want a sub 4.4 wide receiver. The draft really didn't produce you that much, but Nicole Hardman runs a 4.33. That's exactly what you want. Why not go target him? Now, his numbers from last year, as we take a look here, in 8 games, like I said, he was dealing with some injuries. In 8 games, 297 yards, 25 receptions, and 4 touchdowns. Pretty solid numbers. Not spectacular, but pretty solid. Now, of course, 17 games in the year. Let's just double those numbers. Act like you have 17 games, but one of those was going to be a slump game. Let's just double those, go to 16 games, whatever it may be. His numbers would have been about 650 receptions and 8 touchdowns. Those are really, really good numbers. And you pair that with Mike Williams, with Keenan Allen, with your tight ends, Joshua Palmer, Gerald Everett, Donald Parham, if he can stay healthy. This could be a really, really good ad. You get your speed, you get a wide receiver 3/4 who battles with Palmer, and that makes them both better. But the biggest thing here is going to be the contract. Now, we're not quite sure what he's expected to get. It seems like this year a lot of numbers came down. Like, expectations kind of came down. Dalton Schultz reportedly declined a 3-year, $36 million because he thought he could get more. He ends up getting a 1-year deal, $9 million with the Texans. That kind of sucks for the Chargers. Some running backs are getting lower than expectations. Lamar Jackson still can't get an offer that he likes. Expectations for contracts this year had come down, so maybe you can get Nicole Hardman for cheaper. His expectations project to put him in the realm of 8 to 11 million. Now, I say 8 to 11 because 11 million was his projection in I think it was November or December. Dealing with all these injuries could have lowered it a little bit, and the fact that he's been sitting in free agency also could lower it. So 8 to 11 million, and I think it'd probably be more of a long-term contract. It could be a prove-it deal, a 1-year, but I think it'd more than likely be like a 2-year prove-it deal with an out in year 2. That's kind of how I see it, but 8 to 11 million, that is in the realm of possibilities for the Chargers. You fill a need, and I'm sure Justin Herbert could make, Nicole Hardman look amazing. I mean, Nicole Hardman's numbers the year prior were very, very, very good as I think his wide receiver 2 technically at that point. So I think Herbert could make this guy look incredibly good, and he has the talent and the speed to fill the kind of necessary hole that the Chargers have. Now, the last guy here is going to be another Charger. Personally, my favorite Charger from last year's free agency pool, and that's going to be Bryce Callahan. A guy that a little bit kind of got overlooked, but I made a huge impact for this Chargers team. He was a little bit of a surprise last year, but his numbers were great, and he filled a need that was needed to be filled. J.C. Jackson didn't have a great year and then dealt with injury right after that. Michael Davis had a slow start, and Bryce Callahan was able to fit into that role and be a really, really important piece for this team and be a cornerback too for most of the year. And on the back half of the year, when the Chargers really turned that defense around, he was one of, the primary cornerbacks and pretty much the slot receiver or slot cornerback for this team, and did an excellent, excellent job. Now, the thing is, he overplayed his expectations with last year's contract, which is going to raise his price this year. Let's take a look at his numbers. First, Bryce Callahan had 34 tackles, 3 interceptions, and as well as one was a pick 6, 6 pass deflections, and 2 stuffs in 15 games. He did miss 2 games there. Now, the thing is, he raised his stock, as mentioned. That's going to, from 1.3 million last year, he'd probably be in the realm of 3 to 4 million this year, which is, all these numbers are in the Chargers' wheelhouse if they want. But, you go target one of these guys. You could quickly start removing a couple other names pretty quickly. If you go spend $6 million on John Johnson III, that might be the only guy you're able to get on this list. But there's a chance you could maybe get 2 or 3 guys here. I think Bryce Callahan, getting him back on this defense at that cornerback position, maybe a little bit long-term deal because Michael Davis only has 1 year left. Asante Samuel Jr. had an excellent performance last year, especially in the playoffs, but maybe you haven't seen enough in him. J.C. Jackson, you don't know what that's going to be looking like. it could be a smart decision to bring back Bryce Callahan for you and maybe a little bit of long-term deal so you can have some sustainability. I think that would be a great choice. But those are my 5 free agents that I think the Chargers should target and are able to target. But who do you like most on this? Who would you hope the Chargers pick up in free agency off this list or not on this list? And if there's someone off this list, go ahead and give me some detail why you think they would fit with the Chargers. Now, if you enjoyed this content, of course, like, and if you want to see more like it, because I'm going to be covering a whole lot of Chargers content from the remainder of free agency, the draft, and preparing for the regular season, why not subscribe? There's going to be a ton of content coming out for you guys in the coming months, weeks, all this stuff. So why not subscribe? But as always, I hope it taught something today. Hope it made you smile. But you lost something really important to me. Affects most day in a great way, because every single day can be a great day if you all put in the effort. And as always, you guys all be safe out there.